Before I walked down the aisle to give away the rest of my life, my 3-year-old grandson grabbed my hand. I knelt down to fix his little suit, but he was shaking violently. He leaned in, his breath hitching, and whispered, "Grandpa, she hurts Mommy when you go away." He pointed a trembling finger straight at the door, where my beautiful future wife was about to enter. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just toddler imagination, but then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run completely cold. My name is Thomas. I am 73 years old, and I spent my entire life building a logistics empire from the ground up right here in Seattle. I thought my wealth was a shield that would protect my family forever. I never imagined it was the very thing attracting vultures to our doorstep. Before I tell you how a single piece of torn fabric exposed a monster living in my own home, tell me in the comments where you are listening from today. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe a father's instinct is never wrong, because what I am about to share is proof that the most dangerous predators do not hide in the dark. They stand right beside you in the light, smiling. The holding room at the back of the church was quiet, filled with the scent of white roses and expensive cologne. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored suit. At 73, a man does not expect to find love again. After losing my wife 5 years ago, my world had shrunk to board meetings, supply chain logistics, and my daughter Natalie. Natalie was 34, a brilliant woman who had moved back into my estate with my grandson Mason after a bitter divorce. When Valerie walked into my life a year ago with her elegant grace, her warm laughter, and her supposedly nurturing soul, I thought I had found the final puzzle piece to a peaceful retirement. Valerie was 54, sophisticated, and she doted on my daughter and grandson. Or so I believed. Natalie was not at the church that day. Valerie had told me that morning that Natalie caught a severe stomach flu and was bedridden with a high fever. Valerie had even offered to stay behind and care for her, but insisted that her nephew Jason, a broad-shouldered 38-year-old man who had been living in our guest house, could stay and keep an eye on her. It sounded perfectly reasonable. Everything Valerie did always sounded perfectly reasonable. I was fixing my tie when the heavy oak door creaked open. It was Mason. He should have been ring bearer coordinator, but he had slipped away. He was wearing a tiny black tuxedo, but his face was pale and his breathing was shallow and erratic. I turned around and smiled, kneeling down on the carpet to his eye level. I asked him if he was nervous about walking down the big aisle. He did not answer. He just grabbed the fabric of my trousers, his small fists turning white. "Grandpa, she hurts Mommy when you go away." His voice was so fragile, it barely registered in my ears. I frowned, my heart skipping a strange, irregular beat. I asked him what he meant. "Who hurts Mommy?" He pointed at the main door, the exact door Valerie was supposed to walk through. I tried to rationalize it. Kids get confused. They misunderstand things. I kept my voice gentle and told him Mommy was just sick with the flu and that Jason was taking care of her. But Mason shook his head frantically. Tears welled up in his large brown eyes. He reached into his little suit pocket and pulled out a fistful of fabric. He pressed it into my palm. I looked down. It was a piece of blue silk. Not just any silk. It was a torn, jagged strip from the custom robe I had bought Natalie in Paris for her birthday. But the fabric was stiff. I rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger, bringing it closer to the light. The dark, crusted stains on the pale blue silk were unmistakable. It was dried blood. The air left my lungs. The logistical, analytical part of my brain, the part that had run a multi-million-dollar company for decades, collided with pure, primal panic. I stared at the blood, my mind racing through the past week. I had been in Chicago for a 4-day bachelor trip with my old business partners. Valerie and Jason had been alone at the estate with Natalie and Mason. Before I could ask Mason another word, the brass handle of the door clicked. The door swung open, and Valerie stepped in. She looked breathtaking in her white lace gown, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. She clasped her hands together and said, "Thomas, darling, the guests are seated. It is time." The moment her voice filled the room, Mason let out a muffled whimper. I felt something warm soak into my trouser leg. In pure, unadulterated terror, my 3-year-old grandson had wet himself. He scrambled behind my legs, burying his face into the back of my knees, shaking like a leaf in a winter storm. Valerie looked down, her perfectly manicured eyebrows knitting together in a display of exaggerated concern. "Oh my goodness, look at the poor dear," she said, taking a step forward. "He is just overwhelmed by the crowd. Let me take him to the nanny to get cleaned up." She reached out. Her hands, the hands that were about to slip a wedding ring onto my finger, suddenly looked like claws. I pulled Mason tighter behind me. My mind calculated the variables with terrifying speed. If I confronted her right now, if I demanded to know why my daughter's blood was on this torn silk, she would deny it. She would spin a web of lies. But worse, Jason was at my house right now, alone with my daughter. If I caused a scene and security was called, Valerie could send a text to Jason. I did not know what they were capable of, but the blood in my hand told me Natalie was in immediate life-threatening danger. I could not trigger the trap while my daughter was still inside it. I had to stop this wedding, but I had to do it in a way that made me look like the victim. I looked at Valerie, forcing my facial muscles to relax. I opened my mouth to speak, but instead I gasped loudly. I dropped the piece of silk into my pocket, grabbed my chest with both hands, and squeezed my eyes shut. I let out a sharp, choked groan and allowed my knees to buckle. I collapsed heavily onto the thick carpet, dragging down a nearby chair with a loud crash. I writhed on the floor, panting heavily, clutching my left arm as if an invisible vice was crushing my heart. Valerie screamed. It was a perfect theatrical scream. The doors flew open. Groomsmen, event staff, and family members rushed in. People were shouting to call an ambulance. Through half-opened eyes, I saw Valerie kneeling beside me, her hands hovering over my face, crying out my name. But I watched her eyes. They were not filled with the panic of a woman losing the love of her life. They were scanning the room, assessing the crowd, calculating the disruption. I kept my breathing shallow, my face contorted in agony, playing the role of the fragile old man perfectly. The wedding was over. The guests were dismissed. I had bought myself time. The ambulance ride was a symphony of sirens and flashing red lights. The paramedics had hooked me up to an oxygen mask and an EKG monitor. I knew my heart was healthy. I had passed a stress test 2 months ago. But I forced my breathing to remain rapid and shallow, keeping my heart rate elevated just enough to justify the emergency transport. Valerie rode in the back with me, holding my hand, weeping silently as she stroked my hair. When we arrived at the emergency room of Seattle General, they rushed me into a trauma bay. The doctors swarmed me, drawing blood, checking my vitals, asking a barrage of questions. Valerie stood in the corner, playing the devastated fiancé to perfection. She kept telling the nurses that I had been under so much stress with the wedding that she had begged me to take it easy. Once the initial flurry of doctors left the room to wait for the enzyme test results, Valerie approached my bed. She leaned over, her voice soft and sweet. "Thomas, my love, just rest. Everything is handled. I have sent everyone home." I looked at her, my voice weak and raspy. "I need my phone, Valerie. I need to call Natalie. I need to know she is okay." Valerie offered a flawless, sympathetic smile. "Oh, darling, I am so sorry. In the panic your jacket was left behind in the holding room. Do not worry about Natalie. She is resting. I already texted Jason to let him know what happened. He is taking great care of her." My heart hammered against my ribs, making the monitor next to me beep faster. She had my phone. She was isolating me. I closed my eyes, pretending to drift off, but my mind was screaming. I was trapped in a hospital bed, while 2 predators had total control of my home. About 20 minutes later, the curtain pulled back. Jason stepped into the room. He was a tall man, heavily muscled, wearing a dark polo shirt, and an expression of grim concern. He walked over to Valerie and wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. He looked down at me and I kept my eyes closed, breathing evenly. Jason leaned his head down his mouth right next to Valerie's ear. I strained to listen over the hum of the medical equipment. The girl is fighting the restraints. Jason whispered, his voice so low it was almost a vibration. She knocked over a lamp. We need to move the timeline up. He cannot come home today. Valerie did not gasp. She did not flinch. Her weeping, fragile persona vanished for a fraction of a second. She turned her head slightly and whispered back, "The doctors are running tests. I will use the medical proxy to demand they keep him overnight for observation. Just keep her quiet." The chill that spread through my veins was absolute. Medical proxy. I had signed a general medical proxy assigning Valerie as my decision-maker 2 months ago when I updated my will. She was going to use my own legal documents to imprison me in this hospital, while they did God knows what to my daughter. I opened my eyes. I pushed the oxygen mask off my face and sat up in the bed. Valerie spun around, immediately resuming her frantic, tearful act. "Thomas, what are you doing? Lie down," the doctor said. "Your heart is under severe strain." I swung my legs over the side of the bed. "I am leaving," I said, my voice no longer weak. "I feel perfectly fine. It was just a panic attack." "Get me my clothes." Jason stepped forward, using his large frame to block my path to the door. "Uncle Thomas, you are not thinking clearly. You collapsed. You need to stay here. For your own good." The curtain parted again, and the attending physician walked in looking at his clipboard. "Mr. Call, what are you doing out of bed?" "Your troponin levels are normal, which means you have not had a major coronary event, but your blood pressure is wildly erratic. We need to keep you overnight for observation." Valerie rushed to the doctor's side. "Doctor, he is confused. The stress has made him delirious. I am his medical proxy. I insist that you give him a mild sedative to help him rest. He cannot leave this hospital." The doctor looked at Valerie, nodding sympathetically. "I agree, ma'am. We can administer something to help him sleep." I stood up. I did not stagger. I did not shake. I drew myself up to my full height, channeling every ounce of authority I had used to dominate boardrooms for 40 years. I looked the doctor dead in the eye. "Oh, Doctor, I am fully lucid, conscious, and aware of my surroundings. I am refusing treatment against medical advice. If anyone in this room attempts to administer a sedative to me against my explicit will, or attempts to enforce a proxy on a conscious, capable patient, I will have my corporate attorney, Jonathan Pierce, file a medical malpractice lawsuit that will strip you of your license and bankrupt this hospital by tomorrow morning. Now step aside." The doctor froze. He looked at my face, then at the clipboard, and then at Valerie. The authority in my voice had broken her spell. The doctor raised his hands defensively. "Sir, if you want to leave against medical advice, that is your right. I will get the AMA forms." He practically fled the room. I turned to Valerie and Jason. Their faces were rigid. The game had shifted, and they knew it. But they had to keep up the act in public. "Thomas, you are being unreasonable," Valerie said, her voice trembling, though her eyes were cold. "I am only worried about you." I did not reply. I pulled the IV lines off my arm, ignoring the sting of the needle. I demanded my clothes, which a nurse had placed in a plastic bag. I dressed in silence, my mind focused entirely on the 3-mile drive from the hospital to my estate. I did not know what I was walking into. I did not know how deep this conspiracy went. But the torn, bloody silk in my pocket was burning a hole against my thigh. I walked out of the emergency room, brushing past Jason. The cold, Seattle air hit my face, clearing my mind. I hailed a cab outside the hospital and threw a crisp $50 bill at the driver, telling him to get to my Mercer Island estate as fast as legally possible. The war had begun, and I was going home to save my daughter. During the 20-minute ride, my brain worked in absolute overdrive. I was a man who dealt in complex international shipping routes, corporate risk management, and brutal crisis control. I knew exactly how to handle disasters. But this was my daughter. This was my home, my sanctuary. The taxi tires crunched loudly on the gravel driveway of my estate. The massive brick house looked completely normal from the outside. The porch lights were glowing warmly against the evening chill. The grand oak front doors stood tall and imposing, just as they always did. I unlocked the front door with my key, stepping into the massive foyer. The silence inside was thick, unnatural, and deeply suffocating. There were no sounds of cartoons playing from the living room television. There was no smell of dinner baking in the kitchen. I moved quickly up the sweeping mahogany staircase, ignoring the dull, throbbing ache in my aging joints. I headed straight for the east wing, where Natalie and Mason shared a beautiful suite of rooms. When I reached the long hallway, my heart dropped into my stomach. The bedroom door was shut, but it was not just closed. A heavy brass slide lock had been haphazardly screwed into the expensive mahogany frame on the outside of the door. You do not put an external lock on a bedroom door unless you are deliberately keeping someone trapped inside. I did not hesitate for a single second. I grabbed the brass sliding mechanism and yanked it back with brutal force. It was stiff, clearly freshly installed. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy wood, shoving the door open with a loud thud that echoed sharply down the empty hall. The room was cast in deep shadows. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn completely tight against the windows. The air in the room was stale, smelling strongly of medical rubbing alcohol and something sweet and metallic. I fumbled for the wall light switch and flicked it on. My breath caught in my dry throat. Natalie was lying perfectly still in the center of her large canopy bed. She was incredibly pale, her face completely devoid of any natural color. She was wearing a loose gray sweatshirt, and a thick fleece blanket was pulled up securely to her chest. But what made my stomach turn over in sheer panic were her arms. Both of her wrists were resting on top of the blanket, tightly wrapped in thick white medical gauze. Her chest rose and fell in extremely slow, unnatural, and highly mechanical rhythms. She looked completely artificially sedated. I rushed to the side of her bed. I reached out with a trembling hand to touch her cheek. Her skin was terribly clammy and cold. "Natalie," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of my fear. "Sweetheart, Daddy is here. Please wake up." She did not move a single muscle. Before I could examine the medical bandages closer, I heard frantic, heavy footsteps rushing down the hallway. The door swung wider, and Valerie burst into the room. She had clearly just arrived straight from the hospital. She was still wearing her elaborate white wedding gown, the bottom lace hem badly stained with street dirt and mud. Her chest was heaving with exertion, and her eyes were red and severely swollen from crying. She took one look at me standing over Natalie's bed and let out a heartbreaking, agonizing sob. She ran across the bedroom and threw herself onto the floor directly at my feet, wrapping her arms tightly around my knees. "Thomas, oh Thomas, thank God you are finally here," she wailed, burying her wet face into the fabric of my trousers. I tried to pull her up by her shoulders, but she clung to my legs with surprising, desperate strength. "What happened to my daughter Valerie?" I demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the white bandages wrapped tightly around Natalie's fragile wrists. "Why is there a heavy lock installed on the outside of this bedroom door?" Valerie looked up at me, her face a perfect portrait of exhausted, devastated grief. "Thomas, it was absolutely horrible," she sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered emotion. "While you were away on your bachelor trip in Chicago, Natalie had a severe manic-depressive breakdown. It happened so incredibly fast. She just completely snapped. She was screaming that she was a failure as a mother, that the divorce had completely ruined her entire life. She found a sharp pair of heavy crafting scissors in the downstairs study. She tried to end her own life, Thomas. I was utterly terrified. She even threatened little Mason. She screamed that she did not want him to grow up in a broken, miserable world. I felt a sickening wave of nausea wash over my entire body. I remembered the piece of bloody blue silk resting heavily in my suit pocket. I pulled it out and held it directly in front of her weeping face. "And this," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, commanding tone. "Mason handed this exact fabric to me at the church. He said you hurt her." Valerie let out another loud, dramatic sob and covered her mouth with two trembling hands. "Oh, my poor, brave little Mason," she wept bitterly. "Thomas, when Natalie grabbed those sharp scissors, I had to physically fight her. I had to wrestle them out of her bare hands to save her life. She was bleeding everywhere. The only thing I could reach quickly to tie off her wrists and stop the heavy bleeding was the silk sash from the custom robe you bought her in Paris. I had to tightly restrain her with it to keep her from hurting herself more until the private doctor finally arrived. Mason must have seen the blood and gotten so incredibly scared. He is just a toddler. He does not understand. I saved her life, Thomas. I saved our beautiful daughter." Her words hit me like a solid physical blow. The explanation was completely airtight. It explained the medical bandages. It explained the bloody blue silk. For a moment, a blanket of guilt covered my soul. I had been in Chicago drinking expensive scotch while my child was fighting for her life in a violent mental crisis. I knelt down and put my hands on Valerie's shaking shoulders. "I am incredibly sorry, Valerie," I murmured. "We are a family now, Thomas," she whispered softly. I pulled away and stood up to look at my sleeping daughter. I reached out and stroked Natalie's tangled hair. As my fingers brushed her pale forehead, her eyelashes suddenly fluttered. Instead of the frantic glaze of a manic breakdown, I saw clear, sharp, unadulterated terror. Her dilated pupils darted frantically. She was completely medically paralyzed. Her terrified eyes locked onto mine. A single tear rolled down her motionless cheek. She stared right at Valerie with absolute, undeniable, chilling horror. The single tear rolling down my daughter's pale cheek shattered my heart, but it also crystallized my mind. The pure terror in her eyes as she stared at Valerie told me everything I needed to know. She was not manic. She was a prisoner in her own body. I kept my face carefully blank, masking the violent storm of rage building inside my chest. I turned back to Valerie, who was still weeping dramatically on the floor at my feet. I gently pulled her up by her arms, playing the role of the confused, devastated father. I told her to breathe, that we would figure this out together. Just as I helped her to her feet, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jason walked into the bedroom, completely filling the doorframe with his broad shoulders. Behind him was a tall, sharply dressed man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Jason placed a firm hand on the stranger's back, ushering him into the room with a grave expression. "Uncle Thomas," Jason said, his voice smooth and serious. "I am so glad you are home. This is Dr. Carter. He is the private psychiatrist I called when Natalie had her breakdown." Dr. Carter stepped forward and offered me a firm, professional handshake. His grip was warm, his demeanor calm and incredibly reassuring. The kind of man you would instinctively trust with your life. "Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry. We have to under these tragic circumstances," the doctor said, his voice a perfect baritone of clinical empathy. "Valerie and Jason have been absolute pillars of strength over the last few days. Your daughter suffered a severe psychotic break. I am just thankful they were here to prevent a fatal tragedy." He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a dense, immaculately bound medical file. He handed it to me. I opened the heavy folder. My eyes scanned the pages. It was terrifyingly perfect. There were detailed psychiatric evaluations, forged pharmacy receipts for antidepressants, and pages of typed observation notes, detailing my daughter's supposed descent into madness. The file noted severe manic episodes, erratic behavior, and dangerous suicidal ideation. There were even fake transcripts of therapy sessions dating back 6 months. They had manufactured an entire medical history out of thin air. It was a masterpiece of deception. I stared at the forged signature of my own daughter at the bottom of a consent form. My hands trembled not from old age, but from the sheer magnitude of their conspiracy. This was not a spur-of-the-moment lie. They had been planning to destroy Natalie for months. Dr. Carter gently tapped the open folder in my hands. Mr. Caldwell, I have administered a heavy course of sedatives to keep Natalie from harming herself or anyone else, he explained smoothly. But we cannot manage a patient with acute violent psychosis in a residential setting indefinitely. It is far too dangerous, especially with a young child in the house. I have already initiated the paperwork to have her transferred to a highly secure private psychiatric facility in the mountains. We have a bed opening up by the end of the week. She will receive around-the-clock care there. I closed the file, my knuckles turning white. An isolated facility in the mountains. If they took her there, I would never see my daughter alive again. She would disappear into the system heavily medicated until her heart conveniently stopped beating. I looked at the doctor, forcing my voice to tremble with grief. I understand, doctor, I said, looking down at the floor. If she is a danger to herself, we must do what is necessary to keep her safe. I will review these documents tonight. Valerie let out a heavy sigh of relief, leaning her head against my shoulder. Thank you, Thomas, she whispered softly. I knew you would understand. It breaks my heart to see her like this, but we have to protect little Mason. The mention of my grandson sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Where is Mason right now? I asked, pulling away from Valerie's embrace. I need to see him. I need to take him into my room for the night. He must be terrified. I took a step toward the hallway, but Jason immediately shifted his large frame, blocking the doorway completely. His friendly nephew facade dropped for a fraction of a second, replaced by something dark and intensely violent. Uncle Thomas, I do not think that is a good idea at all, Jason said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble. Mason is incredibly traumatized by what he saw his mother do. He has been crying nonstop for 2 days. Valerie is the only one who can soothe him right now. He needs to sleep in her room tonight. I squared my shoulders, staring directly into Jason's cold, dead eyes. I am his grandfather, Jason, I stated, keeping my tone even but firm. I am perfectly capable of comforting my own grandson. Move out of my way. Jason did not budge a single inch. He actually took a half step forward, closing the distance between us. He crossed his massive arms over his chest, looking down at me with bare intimidation. He needs stability tonight, Thomas, Jason repeated, dropping the word uncle entirely. The poor kid is a nervous wreck. If you wake him up now and drag him to the other side of the house, he will just start screaming again. You need to focus on your own health. You just left the emergency room. Let Valerie handle the boy. I looked from Jason to Valerie, and then back to the fake doctor, standing silently by the bed. The reality of my situation crashed down upon me with crushing, absolute certainty. I was completely outnumbered in my own home. My brilliant, beautiful daughter was lying paralyzed on the mattress behind me, chemically bound and unable to speak. My 3-year-old grandson was being held down the hall, effectively a hostage in the hands of the woman I was supposed to marry. They had anticipated every single move. They had forged medical documents, hired corrupt professionals, and manipulated the legal system to trap me perfectly. If I pushed Jason right now, if I demanded to take Mason by force, they would drop the supportive act entirely. They would use their physical advantage. They could easily restrain me, claim I was having another medical episode, and lock me away just like Natalie. I could not win a physical fight against a man half my age. I had to swallow my pride. I had to let them think they were winning this twisted game for now. I let out a long, defeated breath and nodded my head slowly, forcing my shoulders to slump in complete surrender. You are right, Jason, I murmured quietly, playing the broken old man. Valerie should stay with him tonight. I will sleep in the guest room. I turned away, fully knowing I had to quietly play their dark and twisted game to keep my vulnerable family completely alive for one more day. The next morning finally arrived. I woke up in the guest room, my body stiff from a sleepless night. The mints I swapped for my medication left an artificial sweetness in my mouth. My mind was sharp, free from the lethargy the gray powder was supposed to induce. I listened to the house. I heard the distant hum of the vacuum cleaner. Valerie had hired a temporary cleaning service to prepare the house for the wedding guests who were not coming. I knew Jason usually took his morning run around the perimeter of the estate at this hour. This was my window. I slipped out and moved silently down the hallway toward my private study. The oak door was exactly as I left it. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, leaning against the wood to steady my racing heart. The room smelled of old leather and cedar polish. It was my sanctuary, the place where I built a billion-dollar logistics empire. Now, it was the war room where I had to save my own life. I walked over to my mahogany desk and powered on my secure laptop. I had a private network my corporate IT team had set up to prevent espionage. I typed in my password and opened my encrypted email client. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a high-priority fraud alert from my corporate bank. The subject line indicated an unusual massive withdrawal request. I clicked the email to open the encrypted attachment. When the text cleared on the screen, the breath was knocked out of my lungs. A $5 million line of credit had just been opened against my primary logistics holding company. $5 million. The funds were marked as pending transfer to a holding account I did not recognize. I stared blankly at the screen in disbelief. This was no simple theft. This was a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned corporate bleed. They were draining the lifeblood of my life's work. The sheer audacity of the maneuver was breathtaking. I needed to know exactly how confident they were. I closed the laptop, ensuring the screen locked completely. I unlocked the study door and walked downstairs to the kitchen. The morning sunlight was streaming through the large bay windows, casting a deceptive glow over the marble countertops. Valerie was standing by the espresso machine. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater, looking every inch the devoted caretaker. She was carefully measuring out coffee beans. When she heard my footsteps, she turned around, her face instantly melting into a mask of deep, loving concern. "Thomas, darling." "You should be resting in bed," she murmured, rushing over to my side. She placed a gentle hand on my forearm. The contact made my skin crawl, but I forced a tired, grateful smile. "I wanted to come down and get a fresh cup of coffee," I replied, keeping my voice frail and slightly shaky. "I feel a bit more clear-headed today, but still terribly weak." Valerie guided me to a stool at the kitchen island. She poured a cup of black coffee and set it gently in front of me. She leaned against the counter, sighing heavily, as if the weight of the world rested on her delicate shoulders. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. "I need to ask you something about the finances, Valerie," I said casually, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark liquid in my cup. "With everything that happened yesterday, and now Natalie's situation, I just want to make sure we have enough liquid cash available for whatever she needs." I noticed a slight tightening in Valerie's jaw. Her posture stiffened for a fraction of a second before she relaxed seamlessly, sliding back into her character. "Oh, Thomas, please do not worry your fragile heart about money right now," she said smoothly, her tone perfectly soothing. "I handled the immediate expenses while you were resting. I authorized a $50,000 wire transfer from our joint checking account to the psychiatric facility in the mountains. It is a mandatory security deposit to hold the private room for Natalie until the end of the week. They require it up front for high-risk patients." She reached across the marble island and squeezed my hand. "I know it is a large sum, Thomas, but her safety is absolutely priceless. We have to do this." I looked up at her, maintaining my confused expression. $50,000. I repeated slowly, letting the number hang in the air. "Of course, shh. You did the right thing, Valerie. I just wanted to make sure there were no other major withdrawals or complications with the accounts. You have not seen anything unusual, have you? Valerie did not blink. She did not look away. She maintained a steady, loving gaze that chilled me to the bone. Nothing at all, my love, she answered with conviction. The accounts are perfectly fine. I am managing all the household expenses, so you can focus entirely on recovering. I nodded slowly, thanking her for taking such incredible care of our family. I finished my coffee in silence, excused myself, and slowly made my way back upstairs, leaning heavily on the wooden banister to sell the illusion of physical decline. The moment I was back inside my locked study, my frail posture vanished. I dropped into my leather office chair and immediately woke up my encrypted laptop. I needed to see exactly how they had bypassed the rigorous security protocols of my corporate bank. I navigated deep into the banking portal, accessing the raw data of the loan application. I pulled up the digital authorization forms. There, at the bottom of the electronic contract, was my signature. I leaned in closer, my eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. It was an absolutely perfect forgery. It captured the exact slant of my capital letters, the precise pressure of my pen strokes, even the unique curve of my final loop. They had clearly spent months practicing and digitizing my signature from old financial documents scattered around the house. But a forged signature was not enough to clear a corporate loan. The bank required two-factor authentication and a verified IP address from an authorized user. I opened the security logs attached to the transaction. My eyes scanned the long lines of code and time-stamped data. I traced the origin of the digital approval. The IP address did not match my secure office desktop. It matched a device connected to our private guesthouse network. The exact network Jason used. I stared at the glowing numbers, the horrific reality solidifying in my mind. Valerie was lying to my face about a $50,000 medical deposit, using it as a convenient cover story, while Jason was simultaneously sitting in my guest house, bleeding my corporate empire dry. They were dismantling my life's work, extracting every single dollar of my hard-earned wealth, while patiently waiting for the poisoned capsules to stop my heart. I was locked in a deadly race against time, and my own home had become the absolute center of their hunting ground. The heavy glass doors of the private diagnostic clinic closed silently behind me. The certified toxicology report in my hand felt like a solid block of lead. I got into my truck, turned the ignition, and let the air conditioning blast against my face, my own flesh and blood. The little girl I had carried on my shoulders after grueling 12-hour shifts on the oil rigs was actively trying to completely destroy my aging brain. I drove back to my house with a singular, icy focus. I walked straight into the kitchen and grabbed the plastic weekly pill dispenser from the counter. I opened every single compartment. I took out all the dull, chalky tablets that were supposed to be my blood pressure medication and flushed them directly down the kitchen sink. I watched the water wash the poison down the drain. I went to the pantry and found a small tin of generic white breath mints. They were roughly the same size and shape as the sedatives. I carefully placed one mint into each daily compartment alongside my joint supplements. If Valerie checked the dispenser, she would see that I was dutifully taking my pills, but I was not going to take them. Instead, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. She needed a broken, delirious old man who had completely lost his grip on reality. I had spent 40 years managing chaotic, high-pressure drilling operations. I knew how to control a room. I knew how to play a part. I spent the next few days meticulously preparing my performance. I stopped shaving my face. I wore the same wrinkled flannel shirt 2 days in a row. I let the mail pile up on the entryway table. Sunday afternoon arrived, bringing the suffocating heat of late summer. I sat in my favorite rocking chair in the living room. I left the television off. I just stared blankly at the dark screen. Exactly at 1 o'clock, I heard the familiar sound of Valerie's car pulling into the driveway. The front door opened. She had a key. She walked in carrying a plastic grocery bag and a bright, cheerful smile that made my stomach churn. I did not turn my head to greet her. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty television screen. I slouched deeply into the chair, letting my jaw hang slightly slack. I made my breathing slow and shallow. Valerie walked into the living room and stopped in front of me. She asked me how I was feeling today. I blinked slowly, turning my head toward her, as if moving through deep water. I looked at her face, letting my eyes glaze over with artificial confusion. I asked her who she was. I mumbled the words, slurring my syllables together just slightly. I watched a flash of pure triumph cross her face before she quickly masked it with an expression of deep, exaggerated concern. She knelt beside my chair and gently placed her hand on my knee. She told me it was Valerie, my love. She asked if I had taken my medication this morning. I nodded slowly, looking down at my hands. She patted my knee and told me she was going to make me a nice cup of chamomile tea. She walked into the kitchen. I could hear her humming a cheerful tune while she boiled the water. The woman who wanted me dead was humming while she thought my mind was disintegrating. Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the living room, carrying a ceramic mug on a small wooden tray. She also had a manila folder tucked under her arm. She set the tray on the side table next to my recliner. I reached out for the mug with trembling hands. I intentionally let my fingers slip against the smooth ceramic. The mug tipped sideways, spilling hot chamomile tea all over the wooden table and splashing onto the hardwood floor. I let out a confused, pathetic sound and pulled my hands back against my chest, acting completely helpless. Valerie let out a frustrated sigh, but she quickly caught herself. She told me not to worry about it, speaking to me in the high-pitched, condescending tone people use for toddlers. She said she would go to the kitchen to grab some paper towels to clean it up. Before she walked away, she placed the manila folder on my lap. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and clicked a blue ink pen. She told me it was just a routine medical authorization form for my new doctor. She said I needed to sign it, so she could keep picking up my prescriptions from the pharmacy. She placed the pen in my trembling hand and told me to just write my name on the bottom line. She turned her back to me and walked quickly toward the kitchen to retrieve the cleaning supplies. The second she crossed the threshold into the hallway, my trembling stopped completely. The fog vanished from my eyes. I moved with the swift, silent precision of a man half my age. I grabbed the document from my lap and scanned the dense legal text at the very top of the page. It was absolutely not a medical authorization form. It was a formal legal quitclaim deed. She was attempting to permanently transfer the ownership of my primary residence, the house I had shared with my late wife, directly into Jason's name. They were not even waiting for the conservatorship hearing on Friday to start stripping my assets. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I quickly opened the camera application. I snapped 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of the fraudulent quitclaim deed, making sure to capture the property descriptions and Jason's name printed as the primary grantee. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, just as I heard her footsteps returning down the hallway. I instantly slumped back into the recliner, letting my shoulders collapse and my eyes glaze over. I gripped the blue pen awkwardly in my fist. Valerie walked back into the room with a handful of paper towels. She knelt down and began wiping up the spilled tea from the floor. She asked me if I had signed the medical paper yet. I let out a low, confused mumble. I brought the pen down to the signature line at the bottom of the page. I did not sign my real name. My actual signature is a sharp, distinct cursive script that I have used on thousands of legal engineering contracts. Instead, I gripped the pen like a confused child. I pressed down hard and scratched a jagged, barely legible, messy line across the paper. It looked exactly like the desperate scribbling of a man suffering from severe neurological decline. It was a completely forged signature that no forensic handwriting expert in the state of Washington would ever attribute to me. Valerie stood up and gently pulled the document from my hands. She looked at the messy signature and another wicked smile crossed her face. She slipped the paper back into her folder, kissed me on the forehead, and told me she would see me very soon. I sat in my chair and watched her leave my house. I now possessed completely undeniable photographic evidence of her attempted real estate fraud, and she possessed a legally worthless piece of paper. The trap was finally set perfectly. I was ready. I sat in my study for hours, staring at the locked screen of my laptop, until the ambient light shifted to the deep shadows of late evening. I skipped dinner entirely, telling Valerie through the locked door that my stomach was upset from the hospital medications. I was playing my role as the failing old man perfectly. I needed absolute silence to plan my next move. The digital clock on my desk blinked in the darkness. Midnight came and went. 1 in the morning. 2 in the morning. I waited until exactly 3 o'clock. At this hour, the massive estate was usually dead quiet. I knew Jason was a heavy sleeper, and Valerie always took a mild sleeping pill. I slowly stood up from my leather chair. My heart was beating with a furious rhythm. The gray powder was completely out of my system now. I was running on pure adrenaline and a cold, calculating rage. I grabbed a lined notepad and a thick black marker from my desk drawer, slipping them into my robe pocket. I unlocked my study door with a quiet click and stepped out into the dark hallway. The thick Persian carpet muffled my footsteps as I crept down the corridor. I moved like a ghost through my own house. I passed the guest bedroom where Jason was staying. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the rhythmic sound of his breathing. I held my breath as I glided past, my eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the east wing. I reached Natalie's door. The heavy brass slide lock that Jason had installed was engaged. I reached out, pressing my palm firmly against the metal to prevent any metallic clinking. I slid the bolt back with agonizing slowness. It took me a full 2 minutes to pull the lock free without making a single sound. I turned the doorknob and pushed the heavy wooden door open just enough to slip my body inside. The room was incredibly dark, illuminated only by the faint silver glow of the moon filtering through a small gap in the heavy blackout curtains. The smell of sterile medical alcohol was thick in the air. I closed the door behind me and crept toward the large canopy bed. Natalie was lying exactly where I had left her earlier that day. The thick fleece blanket was tucked tightly around her chest. Her wrists were still bound in white medical gauze, resting motionless on top of the covers. I leaned over the mattress, bringing my face close to hers. "Natalie," I whispered, my voice barely a vibration. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, terrifyingly artificial rhythm. I reached out and gently stroked the side of her pale cheek. Her eyelashes fluttered instantly. She opened her eyes. The terror in them was absolute, but so was the recognition. She knew it was me. She tried to open her mouth, but her jaw remained firmly clamped shut. The paralytic drug was holding every single muscle in her body completely hostage. I leaned closer, brushing away a strand of hair from her tear-filled eyes. "Do not try to move, sweetheart," I whispered softly. "Daddy is right here. I know you cannot speak. I know what they are doing to you. I am going to get us out of this, but I need you to communicate with me." I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out the notepad and marker. I held the pad up so it caught the faint moonlight. "I am going to ask you a few questions, Natalie. If the answer is yes, I want you to blink your eyes 1 time. If the answer is no, I want you to blink your eyes 2 times rapidly. Do you understand me?" I waited, holding my breath. Natalie stared at me for a second, and then she blinked 1 single time. Relief washed over me. Her mind was perfectly clear. She was fully conscious, trapped behind a wall of synthetic chemicals. I gripped the notepad. "Valerie told me that you had a severe manic episode while I was in Chicago," I said, keeping my voice incredibly low. "She told me that you grabbed a pair of sharp scissors from the study." Did you try to hurt yourself, Natalie? I watched her eyes intently. She stared at me, her pupils dilated with fresh tears. She blinked twice. No. My stomach twisted with a sickening knot. The bloody blue silk in my pocket felt like a burning coal. If you did not try to hurt yourself, then someone else did this to you, I whispered. I pointed to the thick white bandages wrapping her fragile wrists. Did Jason do this to you? I waited. She blinked twice. No. The truth settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I leaned closer to her ear. Did Valerie cut your wrists on? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the horrific question. Natalie looked at me, a single tear spilling over her lower lash line and sliding down into her hair. She blinked one single time. Yes. The monster I was planning to marry had physically mutilated my only daughter to stage a fake suicide attempt. Valerie had sliced Natalie's wrists just deep enough to create a bloody crime scene, traumatizing my 3-year-old grandson in the process, all to establish a fraudulent medical history. They were building a legal foundation to have Natalie permanently committed to an isolated psychiatric ward in the mountains. This would give them full custody of Mason and complete control of my corporate fortune once they finally stopped my failing heart. I wiped the tear from my daughter's face, my hands shaking with an intense, murderous fury. I am so incredibly sorry I brought that woman into our home, I whispered, pressing a kiss to her cold forehead. But I promise you I will burn her world to the ground. I am going to contact my corporate attorney in the morning. We are going to get you out of this bed. I just need to figure out exactly what specific drug they are giving you. I reached for the small medical chart resting on her bedside table. I wanted to see if the fake doctor had documented the actual paralytic. Before my fingers could touch the clipboard, a sound froze the blood in my veins. Heavy, deliberate footsteps were echoing down the hardwood floor of the hallway. They were moving directly toward Natalie's bedroom door. Panic seized my chest. If Jason caught me in here fully lucid and communicating with my daughter, he would not hesitate to kill us both on the spot. I spun around, scanning the dimly lit room for a place to hide. The walk-in closet was my only option. I sprinted across the thick carpet, slipping behind the louvered door just as the main bedroom door opened. Jason stepped inside. He held a plastic medical syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Time for your midnight snack, crazy girl," he muttered, his deep voice dripping with pure malice. I watched, completely helpless and enraged, as Jason injected her with the drug. The morning sun crept through the gaps in the heavy curtains of the guest room, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I had not slept a single minute. My mind was a steel trap, calculating every variable, every risk, every potential point of failure. I slipped out of bed, purposefully, rumpling my pajamas and messing my hair to maintain the illusion of a deteriorating old man. I grabbed the plush green dinosaur toy, feeling the hard plastic vials hidden deep inside its stuffing. I tucked it under my arm like a confused child clinging to a security blanket and shuffled out of the bedroom. The house was quiet save for the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. Valerie was already awake. I bypassed the kitchen, entirely moving toward the French doors that led out to the sprawling back gardens. My target was Marcus, my head groundskeeper. He had worked for my family for over 15 years. He was fiercely loyal, a man of few property, trimming the thick hedges that bordered the estate. I approached him slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden walking cane I had grabbed from the hallway umbrella stand. Marcus stopped trimming and lowered his shears when he saw me. He offered a polite, respectful nod, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. He had obviously noticed the strange tension gripping the house over the past few days. I looked over my shoulder to ensure the lawn was completely empty. I dropped the senile act instantly. I stood up straight and looked him dead in the eye. "Marcus, I need your help, and I need you to ask absolutely no questions," I said, my voice crisp and commanding. He blinked in surprise but nodded slowly, gripping his gloves. I reached into my robe pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. It was $1,000 in crisp $100 bills. I pressed the money into his calloused palm. I need you to drive into town right now. Buy a prepaid cellular phone with cash. Do not use a credit card. Do not stop to talk to anyone. Bring the phone directly to the old glass greenhouse at the back of the property. When you return, you are going to take this toy dinosaur and meet a private medical courier at the East Gate. You hand him the toy and you come back to work as if nothing happened. Do you understand? Marcus looked at the cash, then at the green dinosaur under my arm, and finally at me. Yes, sir, he replied firmly. He put the money in his pocket, turned around, and walked swiftly toward his utility truck. I made my way toward the old glass greenhouse tucked away in the farthest corner of the estate. It was an overgrown, humid sanctuary filled with rare orchids and tropical ferns that my late wife used to cultivate. Valerie never came out here. She hated the humidity and the dirt. It was the only truly safe place left on my own property. I slipped inside and locked the glass door behind me, retreating into the dense foliage. The smell of wet earth and blooming flowers provided a strange, grounding comfort. I sat on an overturned wooden crate, clutching the toy dinosaur to my chest, and waited. The minutes stretched into absolute agony. Every rustle of the leaves, every gust of wind rattling the glass panes made my heart pound against my ribs. I constantly checked my watch. If Valerie or Jason noticed I was missing from the house, they would come looking for me. They could not afford to lose sight of their primary target. Finally, after 30 agonizing minutes, I heard the crunch of heavy boots on the gravel path outside. A shadow fell across the frosted glass. Marcus tapped twice on the door. I unlocked it quickly. He slipped inside, handing me a small, cheap plastic phone and a prepaid activation card. I handed him the plush dinosaur. A man in a black sedan will be waiting at the East Gate in exactly 1 hour, I whispered, taking the phone. Give him the toy. Tell no one. Marcus gave a solemn nod, took the dinosaur, and vanished back into the garden. I powered on the burner phone. My hands were remarkably steady as I punched in the numbers for Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was a shark in a tailored suit, the most ruthless corporate attorney in Seattle. He did not ask questions. He destroyed obstacles. The line rang twice before he answered. Jonathan. It is Thomas, I said, keeping my voice low. Listen carefully, because I do not have much time. I need you to execute a series of directives immediately. Jonathan did not waste time on pleasantries. Go ahead. Thomas, he replied, his tone instantly shifting into battle mode. First, I need a complete, exhaustive background check on Valerie and a man named Jason, who claims to be her nephew. Dig deep. Look for aliases, sealed criminal records, and any sudden disappearances in their past. I suspect they are highly organized con artists. Second, I need you to flag a $5 million line of credit that was opened yesterday against the logistics holding company. Do not cancel the loan. Do not alert the bank's fraud department to shut it down. I repeat, do not tip them off. I need you to put a silent internal administrative hold on the funds. Let them think the money is available, but ensure they cannot wire a single cent out of the account. Jonathan paused for a fraction of a second. A silent hold is complicated, but I can bury it in corporate red tape by the end of the hour, he confirmed. What is the third directive? Third, I am sending a package containing blood samples and tampered medication to the private lab we use for corporate drug testing. The courier is meeting my gardener at the East Gate right now. I need those results expedited. I need to know exactly what chemical compounds are in those samples by tomorrow morning. My life and my daughter's life depend on it. Jonathan exhaled sharply. Consider it done, Thomas. Do you need me to send private security to the estate? No, I replied firmly. If they see security, they will panic and hurt Natalie. I have to play this out from the inside. I will contact you when I have the next move. I ended the call and crushed the burner phone beneath my heel, burying the shattered plastic deep in the damp soil of a fern. I adjusted my robe, resuming my feeble, hunched posture, and shuffled slowly back across the green lawn toward the main house. As I approached the stone patio, my blood ran completely cold. Valerie was standing completely still on the terrace. She was gripping the heavy iron pruning shears in her right hand, the sharp steel blades glinting dangerously in the bright morning sunlight. She stared at me, her eyes narrowed with extreme calculating suspicion. "Why exactly were you talking to the help, Thomas?" I stared at the pruning shears in Valerie's hand. "Why exactly were you talking to the help, Thomas?" she repeated, her voice dripping with venomous suspicion. I knew if I hesitated, my trap would collapse. I let my shoulders slump, forcing my hands to tremble against my cane. "I was just asking Marcus about the hydrangeas," I muttered, letting my voice waver with pathetic fragility. "I told him we needed to prune the rose bushes before my father comes to visit this weekend." I let a bewildered sigh escape my lips. Valerie's rigid posture relaxed. The calculating glint in her eyes dissolved into an expression of pity. My father had been dead for 40 years. "Oh, Thomas," she cooed, slipping the shears into her apron. "Your father is not coming this weekend, sweetheart. You are just feeling disoriented. Let us go inside and get you settled." I allowed her to guide me across the terrace. Every step took tremendous willpower to maintain the charade. As we entered the living room, the atmosphere shifted to something dense and suffocating. Jason was waiting by the marble fireplace. Sitting on the velvet sofa was a nervous man clutching a worn leather briefcase. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit, and his eyes darted around the opulent room with greed. He looked like a man willing to overlook ethical boundaries for untraceable cash. "Come sit down, darling," Valerie said, guiding me toward my leather armchair. "We have important guests today." I sank into the chair, letting out an exhausted groan. Jason immediately positioned himself directly behind my armchair. His massive presence was a suffocating shadow looming over my shoulders. The small man stood up and offered a practiced smile. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice slick and fast. "My name is Arthur Jenkins. I am a licensed notary public for the state of Washington. Valerie asked me to come by today to help expedite some medical transfer forms." I stared at him with a blank expression. Valerie pulled up a wooden side table in front of my knees. She set down a silver tray holding a fresh pot of steaming black coffee and a stack of thick legal documents. Valerie smoothed the pages. "Thomas, my love," she began, her tone dripping with manufactured empathy. "Dr. Carter called this morning. He managed to secure a private room for Natalie at the psychiatric facility in the mountains. They are ready to transfer her tomorrow. The facility requires you to sign these standard release forms. It authorizes the medical transport and ensures they can administer proper care." She held out an expensive fountain pen. "Just a few signatures on the dotted lines, and we can finally get our beautiful daughter the help she desperately needs," she murmured softly. I took the pen with a shaking hand. I lowered my eyes to the paperwork. I did not need reading glasses to see the bold letters printed across the top of the first page. It did not say medical transfer release. It said general power of attorney and absolute medical proxy. My heart slammed against my ribs. If I signed this document, I was legally signing away my entire life. I would be handing Valerie total control over my logistics, empire, my bank accounts, my property, and my own medical care. She could legally drain my fortune and then authorize the doctors to stop my heart with the swift stroke of a pen. I hesitated, letting the pen hover above the signature line. The moment I paused, I felt a heavy muscular hand clamp down hard onto my left shoulder. It was Jason. His fingers dug deeply into my collarbone, applying a sharp, agonizing pressure that sent a jolt of pain radiating down my arm. He was telling me that if I did not sign, they would force me to sign, or they would realize I was completely lucid and simply kill me right there in the armchair. I was completely trapped. I could not fight them physically. I could not refuse without blowing my cover. I needed to destroy the documents in front of them without raising suspicion. I looked at the thick stack of papers. I looked at the ceramic pot filled to the brim with scalding coffee. I took a shallow breath, tightened my grip on the pen, and lowered the nib toward the paper. I unleashed the performance of a lifetime. I let out a sudden gasp, as if the air had been violently sucked from my lungs. My entire body went rigid. I threw my head against the leather chair and began to convulse. It was not a subtle shake. I faked a terrifying neurological tremor. My arms flailed wildly, my legs kicked out against the wooden side table, and my eyes rolled back into my head. Thomas Valery screamed in shock, jumping back to avoid my thrashing limbs. The violent movement completely caught Jason off guard. He stumbled backward, losing his punishing grip on my shoulder. I utilized the momentum of my violent thrashing to swing my right arm in a wide, uncontrolled arc. My forearm slammed directly into the ceramic coffee pot. The impact was perfect. The pot tipped over, and a massive wave of boiling dark liquid cascaded directly across the wooden side table. The scalding coffee soaked instantly into the thick stack of legal documents. The pristine white paper turned a muddy brown as the ink bled and ran. The hot liquid splashed onto the notary's trousers. He shrieked in pain, dropping his leather briefcase and jumping away from the puddle. "Oh my God, the papers!" Valerie shrieked, her voice cracking with unfiltered panic. She lunged forward, trying to salvage the soaked documents, but the boiling coffee had already reduced the pages to a ruined, illegible pulp. I continued to shake and gasp in the armchair, putting on a terrifying display of a man lost to a severe dementia tremor. Jason grabbed my shoulders, trying to hold me still, cursing loudly under his breath. The notary was frantic, dabbing at his burned legs with a handkerchief. "I cannot notarize ruined documents," the small man babbled nervously, backing toward the front door. "The signature lines are washed out. You will have to print an entirely new batch and file a new request with my office. It will take at least 2 business days to process a new appointment. I cannot do this right now." Valerie stood frozen, holding the dripping, ruined mass of paper in her hands. Her face was contorted in absolute fury. Her carefully laid trap had been destroyed by the clumsy tremors of a dying old man. She glared at me, her chest heaving with suppressed rage, but she could not lash out. She had to maintain the illusion of the caring fiancé in front of the panicked notary. I slowly let the fake tremors subside, letting my head loll to the side as I feigned exhaustion. My chest heaved with deep breaths. Beneath the mask of a broken, senile grandfather, my mind was sharp and victorious. I had destroyed their legal snare. I had protected my empire and my life. I had bought myself exactly 48 hours to execute my final counterstrike. The heavy oak door of my study remained locked. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, staring at the darkened windowpane. It had been nearly 12 hours since the boiling coffee had ruined Valerie's treacherous legal documents and forced the notary to flee my home in a panic. I had bought myself exactly 48 hours of borrowed time, but the physical toll of pretending to be a frail dementia-riddled old man was exhausting. Every muscle in my body ached from the tension. I listened intently to the heavily muffled sounds of the massive estate, finally settling down into the quiet, dark, and incredibly cold Seattle night. Valerie and Jason were downstairs whispering in urgent tones. I knew they were panicking, trying to figure out how to accelerate their timeline now that the medical proxy had been destroyed. The silence in my study was suddenly broken by the sharp, jarring vibration of the cheap plastic burner phone Marcus had purchased for me. It vibrated violently against the polished mahogany of my desk. I snatched it up. The glowing screen displayed a secure text message from my attorney, Jonathan Pierce. The message contained only 3 words. "The private laboratory results are finally in. Call me from a secure line now." My chest tightened painfully as I quickly dialed his secure direct number. Jonathan answered on the very first ring. His voice was completely devoid of its usual polished corporate charm. It was replaced by a grim, deadly seriousness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Thomas, you need to listen to me very carefully," Jonathan said, his tone low and urgent. "I just received the expedited toxicology reports from the private laboratory. The courier delivered the plush dinosaur toy directly to the head toxicologist this morning. They broke down the chemical compounds in both the gray powder you found inside your daily medication capsules and the trace blood samples we recovered from Natalie's room." I gripped the plastic phone so tightly, my knuckles turned entirely white. "Give it to me straight." "Jonathan," I replied, my voice a hollow rasp in the quiet study. "What exactly has that woman been feeding me?" I heard the rustle of heavy paper through the receiver. "The gray powder inside your blood pressure medication is a highly concentrated synthetic form of digitalis," Jonathan explained. "It is a potent cardiac glycoside," his words dropping like heavy stones. "In small controlled medical doses, it treats heart conditions. But the dosage in those capsules was specifically engineered to be lethal over a prolonged period. It builds up silently in your bloodstream, slowly weakening the heart muscle until it triggers a massive fatal cardiac arrest. The most insidious part," Jonathan continued, "is that a death caused by digitalis toxicity almost perfectly mimics a natural age-related heart attack. If you had collapsed and died in this house, the county coroner would have taken one look at your age, reviewed your recent hospital visit, and ruled it a tragic but completely natural cardiovascular failure. No one would have ordered a specialized autopsy. Valerie would have played the grieving widow, buried you with tears in her eyes, and walked away with your entire logistics empire without a single trace of foul play." The sheer, terrifying brilliance of her murderous plan washed over me. She had kissed my cheek every morning, looked deeply into my eyes with manufactured love, and handed me the very poison designed to stop my heart. She had smiled while she slowly murdered me. I felt a wave of profound nausea followed instantly by a surge of white-hot, blinding rage. But my anger over my own fate was nothing compared to the terror I felt for my daughter. "What about Natalie?" I demanded, my voice shaking with raw, unadulterated paternal fear. "What did the laboratory find in her blood sample? Tell me what they have been injecting into my little girl." I heard Jonathan exhale a long, heavy breath. "Thomas, I need you to brace yourself," Jonathan warned gently. "The substance they found in Natalie's system is not a standard psychiatric sedative. It is a highly restricted black market chemical compound, primarily used in large animal veterinary medicine. It is an extreme high-grade paralytic muscle relaxant. When injected into a human bloodstream, it completely severs the brain's ability to communicate with the voluntary muscular system. It induces a state of total, absolute physical paralysis." Tears of pure rage blurred my vision. My poor, beautiful daughter. "She was fully conscious," I whispered, remembering the sheer terror in her dark eyes when she had looked at Valerie. "She was completely awake the entire time." "Yes," Jonathan confirmed grimly. "The drug does not affect cognitive function or sensory perception. Natalie can hear everything, see everything, and feel everything happening around her, but she is utterly trapped inside her own body, unable to move a single finger or scream for help. They have been using it to simulate a catatonic, unresponsive state to justify her permanent transfer to that isolated psychiatric facility in the mountains. They intentionally broke her physical body so they could permanently steal her young child and completely eliminate her as a legal heir to your massive corporate fortune. It is psychological torture, Thomas." I pressed my hand hard against my chest. The pain radiating through me was not from the digitalis. It was the crushing, devastating agony of a father realizing the hell his child had endured right under his own roof. "I will kill them," I vowed softly into the phone. "Thomas, you must remain focused." Jonathan interrupted quickly, his voice cutting through my escalating fury. "You cannot let your emotions dictate your actions right now because the toxicology reports are not the worst news I have for you tonight." I blinked momentarily, stunned by his statement. How could anything possibly be worse than discovering this horrific nightmare? I ran the background checks and traced the financial anomaly you flagged. Jonathan explained, his pace quickening. That $5 million line of credit opened against your company yesterday. I dug deep into the routing numbers. I followed the digital trail through 3 different offshore holding accounts. It is not a $5 million loan, Thomas. It is a $10 million loan, and they did not borrow it from any legitimate corporate bank. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk. What are you saying, Jonathan? Who did they borrow the money from? The line crackled with static for a brief moment, before Jonathan delivered the final devastating blow. Valerie and Jason used your corporate assets, your forged digital signature, and your personal estate as collateral to borrow $10 million from a brutal international cartel operating out of Eastern Europe. They never intended to drain your bank accounts. That takes too long, and it leaves a massive paper trail. Their true plan is much faster and infinitely more violent. They are going to secure the $10 million in untraceable cryptocurrency board, a private jet out of Seattle, and then completely vanish into thin air. They fully intend to let the cartel brutally murder you to collect the massive debt. The line went completely dead. I sat in the dim light of my study, the cheap plastic burner phone pressed tightly against my ear, listening to the hollow dial tone. $10 million from an Eastern European cartel. My mind raced to comprehend the sheer scale of the violence they had invited into my home. Valerie and Jason were not just opportunistic thieves trying to swindle a wealthy widower out of his retirement funds. They were apex predators, orchestrating a financial bloodbath that would wipe out my entire bloodline. They had mortgaged my life to ruthless professional killers, planning to be half a world away when the debt collectors came to slaughter my family. I lowered the phone, my hands trembling with a rage so profound it felt like ice water flooding my veins. I could not afford to panic right now. Panic was a luxury for victims, and I absolutely refused to be a victim. I opened the secure application on my burner phone that linked directly to the micro cameras I had hidden in the living room and in Natalie's bedroom. I needed to know their exact movements. I needed to see what they were doing right now while they thought I was asleep. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale, bluish glow over my face. I tapped the live feed for the decorative clock located on the mantelpiece in the main living room. The timestamp in the corner of the small screen indicated it was currently 2:15 in the morning. The massive living room was dark, illuminated only by the dying embers of the gas fireplace and a single low crystal lamp resting on the wet bar. I watched closely as the heavy oak doors swung open. Valerie and Jason walked into the frame. The immediate change in their physical demeanor was incredibly jarring. During the day, they maintained a respectful, formal physical distance, playing the roles of an elegant older aunt and her protective, dutiful nephew. But now, in the shadowed privacy of the night, that facade melted away entirely. Jason poured 2 large glasses of my oldest, most expensive single malt scotch. He walked over to the velvet sofa where Valerie was lounging. She had kicked off her designer heels and was stretching her bare legs across the expensive cushions. She did not look like the refined, caring woman I had almost married. She looked relaxed, triumphant, and deeply sinister. Jason handed her the crystal glass. Instead of taking the drink, Valerie reached up, grabbed the collar of his dark shirt, and pulled him down toward her. I stopped breathing. Jason did not pull away in shock. He leaned into her and they engaged in a long, deeply passionate kiss. It was not a momentary lapse of judgment. It was a practiced, deeply familiar embrace of 2 people who had been lovers for a very long time. My stomach violently churned as the horrific reality snapped into perfect focus. They were not aunt and nephew. They were not related at all. They were a romantic couple. A pair of highly skilled career con artists who traveled the country infiltrating the lives of wealthy, vulnerable targets. Valerie played the sophisticated, loving companion to wealthy older men, while Jason acted as her muscle, her enforcer posing as a distant relative to gain access to the property. They had manufactured their entire existence. Every soft touch, every loving word Valerie had ever spoken to me was a calculated performance designed by this twisted husband and wife team to rob me of everything I had. I turned the volume up on the burner phone, pressing the small speaker tightly against my ear to catch their whispered conversation. Jason sat down beside her, resting his large hand intimately on her knee. "The old man really put on a spectacular show with that coffee pot today," Jason laughed, his deep voice dripping with pure amusement. "I actually thought he was going to bite off his own tongue. He completely ruined the proxy documents." Valerie took a long sip of her scotch and smiled a wicked, terrifying smile. "Let him have his little tantrums," she sneered softly. "It does not matter anymore. The paperwork was just a backup plan to get the local bank accounts. We already secured the cartel funds with his forged digital signature. The cryptocurrency transfer clears the blockchain protocols by tomorrow night. He can spill all the boiling coffee he wants. He is a walking corpse." Jason chuckled, clinking his glass against hers. "And the daughter?" he asked. "She fought me hard the night you cut her wrists. I thought she was going to scream the house down before the paralytic kicked in. Do you think we need to give her another dose of the animal tranquilizer before we leave?" Valerie shook her head, her eyes flashing with absolute cruelty. "No, let her wake up," Valerie replied coldly. "By the time the paralytic fully wears off, we will be gone, and the cartel enforcers will be knocking on the front door to collect their $10 million. She will wake up just in time to watch them tear her precious father apart. It is poetic, really. He will die of a broken heart, and then he will just die." I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting back the physical bile rising in my throat. They were actually laughing out loud. They were sitting on my sofa, drinking my scotch, and laughing about the psychological torture they had inflicted on my beautiful daughter. They were casually joking about leaving her completely paralyzed and entirely helpless as a blood sacrifice to dangerous international criminals. I forced myself to keep my eyes glued to the small screen. I needed every piece of intelligence I could gather. Jason leaned back, pulling Valerie against his chest. "I cannot wait to get out of this depressing city," he muttered, kissing the top of her head. "Did you finalize the travel logistics?" Valerie nodded, pulling her phone from her pocket. "The funds finish routing by tomorrow evening. I already booked the private charter flight out of Boeing Field. We leave for Geneva, Switzerland first thing Friday morning. We will be sipping champagne in the Alps before the cartel even realizes the old man does not have their money. Geneva, Friday morning." I lowered the small plastic phone, watching the illuminated screen go completely dark in my violently trembling right hand. A cold, terrible clarity suddenly washed over my racing mind, replacing the lingering shock with pure determination. Today was only Wednesday. They were actively planning to vanish in less than 48 hours, carelessly leaving my innocent daughter and my defenseless grandson behind to face the merciless wrath of a heavily armed cartel death squad. I had absolutely no margin for error. I had less than 2 days to meticulously dismantle their entire criminal operation, completely sever their international escape route, and turn their brilliant, deadly trap directly back onto them with devastating force. I locked the burner phone and stood up slowly in the pitch-black silence of my empty study. The fearful time for quiet hiding was now officially and permanently over. The first step to taking back my life was purging the poison from my veins. I completely stopped taking the digitalis-laced capsules Valerie had been feeding me. I flushed the remaining toxic powder down the drain of my master bathroom, replacing the contents with harmless baking soda, just in case she decided to check my pill organizers. The physical withdrawal hit me like a freight train. By Wednesday morning, a vicious pounding headache throbbed behind my eyes, and my joints ached with a deep, bone-chilling cold. But beneath the physical misery, a profound transformation was taking place. The heavy, suffocating fog that had clouded my brain for weeks began to lift entirely. My mind, the same mind that had outmaneuvered rival logistics executives across the globe, sharpened into a lethal, razor-focused instrument. I was no longer a confused old man waiting to die. I was a father preparing to completely annihilate the monsters who had tortured his daughter. I retrieved the plastic burner phone from its hiding place inside a hollowed-out hardback book on my study shelf. I dialed Jonathan Pierce. The call connected immediately. Jonathan had spent the entire night compiling the financial evidence of the cartel loan and coordinating with a trusted ally in local law enforcement. He patched Detective Mark Callahan into our secure conference call. Callahan was a veteran investigator with the Major Crimes Unit, a man who specialized in dismantling high-level financial fraud and organized syndicates. Jonathan had already briefed him on the forged signatures, the offshore routing numbers, and the animal tranquilizers found in Natalie's blood work. "Mr. Caldwell," Detective Callahan said, his voice a low, steady rumble over the secure line. "Your attorney has provided enough preliminary evidence to arrest these two for multiple counts of fraud and attempted murder. I have a tactical team on standby. We can breach your estate within the hour and take them into custody." I tightened my grip on the small plastic phone. "No, Detective," I replied firmly. "If you raid the house right now, they will immediately lawyer up. They will claim the cartel loan was a tragic misunderstanding and that the drugs in my daughter's system were a medical accident. They are career con artists. They have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of slipping through legal loopholes. I do not just want them arrested. I want them utterly destroyed. I want them caught absolutely red-handed, confessing to their crimes on tape with nowhere left to run." Jonathan spoke up, his tone reflecting my own ruthless pragmatism. "What is the strategy, Thomas?" I laid out the trap with meticulous precision. I told them I would host a formal celebratory dinner that evening. I would convince Valerie and Jason that I was ready to sign an updated will transferring 100% of my corporate estate directly into Valerie's name, bypassing my daughter entirely. Their greed would blind them to the danger. They would sit at my dining table eagerly waiting to secure the final piece of their puzzle. I instructed Jonathan to arrive at the estate exactly at 8 o'clock, acting as the executor of the new will. But instead of bringing legal documents, he would bring the live feed from my hidden cameras. I told Detective Callahan to position his heavily armed tactical units in the dense tree line surrounding my Mercer Island property. They were to wait for my explicit signal before breaching the dining room doors. Callahan agreed to the parameters, recognizing that a recorded confession would guarantee a life sentence in federal prison for both of them. I ended the call and stood up from my desk. For the first time in weeks, my balance was absolutely perfect. The subtle tremor in my hands had completely vanished. I walked out of my study and headed toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. That is when I made my first critical mistake. I was so focused on the logistics of the evening trap that I temporarily forgot to maintain my physical facade. I strode down the long, sunlit hallway with the confident, purposeful stride of a corporate chairman. Valerie was walking out of the formal dining room, carrying a stack of linen napkins. We crossed paths in the grand foyer. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her sharp, calculating eyes swept over me from head to toe. I immediately realized my error. I let my shoulders slump forward and grabbed the edge of a mahogany console table, forcing a weak, confused smile onto my face. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Valerie had seen the sturdy, effortless way I moved. She noticed the healthy, flushed color returning to my cheeks. "Thomas, darling, you look remarkably well today," Valerie noted. Her voice was smooth and melodic as always, but a dark, dangerous undercurrent rippled beneath her words. Her gaze lingered on my steady hands. "You seem to have a lot of energy this afternoon." I forced a dry, rattling cough to cover my tracks. "I am just trying to push through the fatigue, my love," I murmured, keeping my head bowed submissively. "I want to be strong for our special dinner tonight. I am so eager to finalize the estate paperwork with Jonathan. I want to make sure you are completely taken care of forever." The mention of the estate paperwork worked exactly as intended. The intense suspicion in her eyes was briefly overshadowed by a flash of unrestrained greed. She smiled, stepping forward to brush an imaginary piece of lint from my lapel. "That is so wonderfully generous of you, Thomas," she cooed softly. "You just go back upstairs and rest. Leave everything for tonight, to me. I slowly shuffled up the grand staircase, leaning heavily on the wooden banister until I was completely out of her line of sight. As soon as I reached the second floor, I sprinted silently down the corridor and locked myself back inside my private study. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I had slipped. Valerie was a master manipulator, and she did not miss subtle details. I pulled out my burner phone and quickly opened the live feed from the micro cameras. I needed to know if she had bought my excuse. The screen illuminated, showing the hidden camera view of the guest suite. Jason was frantically packing a large black duffel bag with stacks of banded currency and passports. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Valerie marched into the room. Her mask of sweet domesticity was completely gone. Her face was a mask of cold, lethal panic. "Stop packing," Valerie hissed, slamming the door shut behind her. "The old man is not declining. I just saw him walking through the foyer. His color is back and his hands are steady. He is not taking the digitalis. He is playing us Jason. He knows." Jason froze, dropping the stack of passports onto the bed. He turned to face her, his massive chest heaving. "If he knows, then the police could be on their way right now," Jason growled, his voice rising in panic. "We need to leave for the airport immediately. Forget the dinner. We take the cartel money and we run." Valerie shook her head violently, her eyes burning with a terrifying homicidal resolve. "We cannot run yet," she snapped. "The cryptocurrency transfer from the cartel loan does not fully clear the offshore routing protocols until 8 o'clock tonight. If we abort now, we walk away with nothing but the pocket cash. I am not leaving a billion-dollar logistics empire and a $10 million cartel payout on the table just because this stubborn old man refuses to die on schedule." She walked over to her designer leather handbag resting on the vanity table. She reached inside and pulled out a long, thick medical syringe. It was completely filled with a dense, cloudy liquid. Jason stared at the needle, his eyes widening in alarm. "What is that?" he demanded. Valerie held the syringe up to the light, tapping the glass barrel with her perfectly manicured fingernail. "It is a concentrated double dose of the paralytic mixed with a synthetic heart stopper," she explained, her voice devoid of any human empathy. "I am done waiting for his cardiovascular system to naturally fail. I am not waiting for Friday. The timeline just changed. I am finishing the old man tonight before his lawyer arrives." I sat frozen in my leather chair, staring at the glowing screen of the burner phone. The blood drained entirely from my face. My meticulously planned trap for dinner was no longer viable. They were not going to wait for the evening meal. They were going to murder me in broad daylight to secure their escape. I looked at the digital clock on my desk. I had drastically underestimated the sheer ruthlessness of the woman I had invited into my home. The climax was not going to happen on my terms. It was happening right now. I could not allow Valerie to walk up those stairs with that lethal syringe. If she cornered me, I would have no choice but to fight her. Jason would inevitably rush in to finish the job. I had to disarm her murderous intent by feeding her what she craved more than my death. She craved absolute control of my fortune. I unlocked my study door and stepped into the hallway just as Valerie appeared on the staircase. She walked with deliberate, predatory steps. Her right hand was buried inside her cashmere cardigan pocket. I knew what she was gripping. "Valerie, my darling!" I called out, my voice booming with a robust resonance. She froze instantly, her hand gripping the fabric of her pocket tightly. I walked toward the stairs, intentionally ditching the wooden cane I had been leaning on for days. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, and offered her a broad, beaming smile. "I feel absolutely incredible," I announced, letting out a hearty chuckle. "It is like a dark cloud has completely lifted from my mind. I had an epiphany sitting in my study just now. A moment of pure clarity about our future together." Valerie stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and deep suspicion. Her hand remained buried in her pocket. "Thomas," she stammered slightly, trying to quickly recalibrate her posture. "You should not be exerting yourself." "What kind of epiphany?" I walked down 3 steps, taking her free hand in mine. I realized that life is entirely too short to leave things unfinished, I said, maintaining steady eye contact. I have been foolishly delaying the inevitable. I just got off the phone with Jonathan Pierce. I told him to draft a completely new will bypassing all previous trusts. I am signing 100% of my corporate estate, all logistics holdings, and this property directly over to you. I am cutting Natalie out entirely. She is clearly too unstable to manage the wealth. You are the only person who truly cared for me. I want to make it official tonight. The transformation in her face was a terrifying masterpiece of human greed. The homicidal tension radiating from her body vanished in an instant. The grip on the hidden syringe loosened as her hand slipped empty from her pocket. She looked at me, her pupils dilating with the rush of imminent victory. If I signed everything over to her voluntarily tonight, she would not have to risk a messy murder investigation. She could simply take the money, pay off her cartel debt, and leave me completely destitute. Oh, Thomas, she breathed, her voice trembling with genuine greedy excitement. I do not know what to say. Are you absolutely sure about this? You are acting so sudden. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied smoothly. Jonathan is coming over at 8 o'clock tonight with the final paperwork. I want us to celebrate. Tell Jason to open the vintage Bordeaux I have been saving in the cellar. Put on your best dress, Valerie. We are having a formal celebratory dinner in the dining room. I am going to put on a proper suit. I refuse to sign away my legacy wearing a tired old bathrobe. Valerie threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a triumphant embrace. I will make sure everything is perfect for tonight. My love, she whispered. I watched over her shoulder as Jason stepped out from the guest suite hallway, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Valerie pulled away and looked up at him, flashing a victorious smile. Jason, she called out with arrogant authority. Go down to the cellar and get the wine. Thomas is signing the estate over to me tonight. Jason's confusion melted into a look of predatory satisfaction. He nodded slowly, his eyes locking on Tyne with a sickeningly smug expression. He thought they had completely broken me. He thought I was just a foolish, desperate old man handing over the keys to his kingdom. I smiled back at him, a hollow, empty smile, and turned to walk back up the stairs. The trap was successfully reset. The climax would happen exactly where I wanted it. At 7:30 that evening, I walked into the dining room. I wore my finest tailored charcoal suit. My silver hair was neatly combed. I stood with the commanding posture of a man who controlled a billion-dollar empire. The mahogany table was set with bone china and crystal glasses. The vintage Bordeaux was breathing in a glass decanter. Valerie sat at the far end, wearing a black evening gown, her neck adorned with diamonds. Jason sat to her right, in a sharp, dark blazer. They both looked up as I entered. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of genuine unease pass between them. I did not look like a victim. I truly looked like a threat. Their overwhelming greed quickly suppressed their protective instincts. They were mere minutes away from legally securing the largest payday of their criminal careers. I took my seat at the head of the table. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, ignoring the wine Jason offered. I steered the conversation with absolute dominance, talking about market shares, shipping regulations, and asset allocations. I specifically brought up our recent corporate expansion into the European markets, a topic I knew Valerie had zero knowledge of. You know, Valerie, I said, swirling the sparkling water in my glass. Managing the Geneva hub has been an absolute logistical nightmare lately. The banking regulations there are incredibly strict when it comes to sudden large liquid transfers. Don't you agree? Valerie's silver spoon clattered loudly against her porcelain soup bowl. Her eyes darted toward Jason for a fraction of a second before she recovered, offering a stiff, overly bright laugh. Oh, Thomas, you know I leave the boring banking details to you. I am just focused on our beautiful future together. Of course, I replied, my voice smooth as silk but laced with a subtle razor-sharp edge. But since you will be taking over the empire tonight, You will need to understand how quickly untraceable funds can be frozen if the wrong international party is alerted. It is a highly dangerous game moving millions across borders. Jason cleared his throat loudly, shifting his massive shoulders in his tailored blazer. Uncle Thomas, maybe we should save the corporate lectures for after the paperwork is signed. You do not want to exhaust your heart. He was sweating. A single distinct bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. They were trapped in my web, completely unaware that I was playing with my food before the kill. The tension in the dining room grew thick and suffocating. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed loudly, signaling it was exactly 8 o'clock. Valerie leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with hungry anticipation. She smoothed the napkin on her lap, her fingers twitching with nervous energy. Jonathan should be arriving any moment now, she noted smoothly. Did he say if he was bringing a notary to witness the signatures? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, placing the crystal glass gently back onto the table. Jonathan is bringing exactly what is necessary to conclude our business tonight, I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the cavernous room. Right on cue. The heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the foyer. Jason immediately stood up, buttoning his blazer with a confident smirk. I will go let the lawyer and Uncle Thomas, he said, turning toward the hallway. Do not worry, we will have all this finalized very shortly. I sat perfectly still, watching the archway of the dining room. I heard the heavy oak door open. I heard a brief muffled exchange of words in the foyer, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Jason backed into the dining room, his confident smirk completely gone. His face was tense. Attorney Jonathan Pierce walked through the grand archway and stepped into the dining room light. I was wearing an immaculate navy suit, his expression hardened into a mask of pure, lethal professionalism. But my eyes immediately fell to his hands. Jonathan was not carrying a leather briefcase filled with estate documents. He was holding a small black electronic remote control. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind Jonathan Pierce. He walked the length of the table, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor, and stopped directly at my right. He placed the small remote control gently onto the pristine white tablecloth next to my crystal water glass. He took a deliberate step back, crossing his arms. Valerie stared at the small plastic device, her perfect smile faltering. She glanced nervously at the empty space where Jonathan's briefcase should have been. Thomas, my love, what is this? She asked, her voice suddenly fragile. I thought we were finalizing the estate transfers tonight. Where are the legal documents? Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his shoulders tensing beneath his dark blazer. His predatory smirk had completely vanished, replaced by the instinctual wariness of a cornered animal. I did not answer her immediately. I picked up the remote, feeling the smooth plastic against my palm. I looked down the long length of the dining table, taking in the sight of the two people who planned to torture my daughter, bankrupt my legacy, and leave me to be slaughtered by international criminals. I pressed my thumb firmly against the central power button. Behind Valerie, my massive smart television sprang to life. The sudden brightness illuminated the room, casting blue shadows over their confused faces. The high-definition screen did not display a legal contract. It displayed the clear night vision footage from the micro-camera I had hidden inside the decorative clock. Valerie gasped loudly, twisting around in her chair to stare at the screen. Jason stood up so quickly, his heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the floor. The hidden camera footage immediately began to quietly play, accompanied by amplified audio that filled the silent dining room. The video showed Valerie lounging on my velvet sofa, kicking off her heels. It showed Jason pouring 2 large glasses of scotch. It showed him sitting down beside her, resting his large hand intimately on her bare leg. And then it showed them pulling each other into a deep, passionate kiss. The sound of their whispered laughter echoed through the speakers. The audio playback was completely unmistakable. Let him have his little tantrums, the digital Valerie sneered from the screen, her voice dripping with pure malice. The paperwork was just a backup plan. We already secured the cartel funds with his forged digital signature. The cryptocurrency transfer clears by tomorrow night. He is a walking corpse. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table, watching the blood drain from their faces in real time. Jason stared at the bright television screen as if it were a dangerous snake about to strike. Valerie raised a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. But the video was not over. The scene on the screen abruptly cut to the secondary camera, the one I had carefully concealed inside Natalie's bedroom. The digital clock timestamp in the corner read 3:15 in the morning. The footage showed the Heavy's bedroom door creaking open. It showed Jason stepping into the dark room, his massive frame casting a long shadow across my paralyzed daughter's bed. The lens captured the terrifying plastic medical syringe gleaming in his hand. "Time for your midnight snack, crazy girl," his recorded voice grumbled through the dining room speakers. The video clearly depicted him leaning over my helpless daughter, gripping her fragile arm and plunging the needle deep into her vein to inject the paralytic. The reality of their crimes was laid bare, broadcasting loudly in the room where they planned to steal my entire world. The dining room descended into a heavy silence as the television screen faded to black. The sheer crushing weight of the visual evidence hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of undeniable guilt. Valerie began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving violently against her evening gown. She looked frantically toward the hallway, then back at me, her mind scrambling for a way out. "Thomas," she stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "Thomas, please, this is a terrible misunderstanding. That video is manipulated. You have to listen to me." I did not say a single word. I simply looked at her with cold, absolute disgust. Jason, however, did not bother trying to lie. His survival instincts took over. With a guttural roar, he reached across his place setting and grabbed the steak knife resting beside his dinner plate. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with homicidal desperation. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, shattering crystal wine glasses and scattering bone china across the floor. He quickly brought the sharp steel blade back, aiming directly for my chest. He was going to murder me right there in front of my lawyer. He never even made it halfway across the table. Before the steak knife could reach me, the heavy oak doors of the dining room exploded inward. The wood splintered and brass hinges shattered as Detective Mark Callahan and 6 heavily armed SWAT officers crashed through the threshold. The coordinated breach was deafening, a sudden storm of tactical gear, bright flashlights, and booming commands. "Seattle police, drop the weapon right now," Callahan roared, his service weapon drawn and aimed directly at Jason's chest. Jason froze for a fraction of a second, his arm suspended in the air. That hesitation was his undoing. 2 tactical officers vaulted over the fallen doors and tackled him simultaneously. They hit him with the force of a runaway train. Jason was thrown violently from the dining table, slamming hard into the polished hardwood floor. The steak knife clattered harmlessly away into a corner. The officers pinned him face down, driving a tactical knee sharply between his shoulder blades. He groaned in pain as they forcibly wrenched his arms behind his back, the handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists with a sharp metallic click. The immediate threat was completely neutralized in a matter of seconds. Detective Callahan holstered his weapon and turned toward the far end of the ruined dining table. The officers secured the perimeter of the room. Valerie was backed into the corner, pressing herself flat against the paneling. 2 officers moved swiftly toward her, grabbing her by the arms and pulling her forward. But instead of crying, instead of begging for mercy, like the caring woman she had pretended to be for a year, Valerie's demeanor fractured. She threw her head back and began to laugh. It was a loud, shrill cackle that echoed madly over the sounds of the officers securing the room. Her eyes burned with a manic, defiant arrogance. She jerked her arms against the officers' grips, staring directly at me down the length of the table. "You think you are so smart, Thomas?" she shrieked, her laughter turning into a cruel sneer. "You think showing a little video to the local police changes anything at all? You are too late, old man. You are too late. I already wired the $10 million cartel loan directly to my untraceable offshore account in Geneva this afternoon." The money is gone. You can arrest me right now. I do not care. I will use that money to hire the absolute best defense attorneys. I will easily post my full bail by tomorrow morning, and I will vanish before you can blink. I still won. Her shrill laughter echoed off the high ceiling of the dining room, bouncing against the crystal chandelier and the ruined mahogany table. Valerie stood there, surrounded by armed tactical officers, yet she looked at me as though she were a conquering queen. She genuinely believed she had completely outsmarted me. She believed that the $10 million she had stolen from an Eastern European cartel using my forged digital signature was safely tucked away in a secure Swiss bank account. She thought her only consequence would be a temporary stint in a local holding cell before she posted bail and boarded a private jet to Geneva. I did not flinch. I did not shout. I did not even stand up from my chair at the head of the table. Instead, I calmly reached forward and picked up the heavy crystal decanter filled with the vintage Bordeaux I had specifically requested for this evening. The dark red wine flowed smoothly into my glass, the rich aroma of oak and dark berries filling the tense space between us. The armed officers watched me in absolute silence. Detective Callahan stood completely still, his hands resting on his tactical belt, allowing me to take the floor. Even Jason, pinned face down on the hardwood floor with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, stopped his violent struggling. I brought the crystal glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was truly exceptional. I set the glass down with a soft clink that sounded exactly like a judge's gavel striking a wooden block. I looked directly into Valerie's manic, triumphant eyes with absolute chilling dominance. "I did not block your transfer, Valerie," I said smoothly, my voice carrying the quiet, lethal weight of a man who held every single card in the deck. Her victorious smile wavered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly forced it back into place. "Of course you did not," she sneered, tossing her dark hair over her shoulder with an air of pure arrogance. "You were way too busy playing the pathetic, demented old man to realize I was draining your corporate accounts right under your nose. The money cleared the blockchain an hour ago. You have absolutely nothing left, Thomas. You are ruined." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together, and resting them against my chin, I shook my head slowly, offering her a look of profound, terrifying pity. "That is where you are completely wrong," I replied, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You see, when I discovered the fraudulent $5 million line of credit you tried to open yesterday, I realized something incredibly important. You were not stealing from my corporate bank. You were using my company as collateral to borrow a massive sum of money from a highly dangerous, heavily armed international syndicate. You fully intended to let them murder me to collect the debt while you fled to Switzerland. It was a brilliant, vicious plan. But you made one catastrophic mistake." Valerie swallowed hard. The manic energy was slowly beginning to drain from her rigid posture. "What mistake?" she demanded, her voice losing its sharp, arrogant edge as a sliver of genuine doubt crept into her mind. "When you forged my digital signature to execute the cartel loan, you used the wireless network in my guest house," I explained, enunciating every single word with deliberate, piercing precision. "You left your digital fingerprints everywhere. You left a trail so wide and so painfully obvious that my corporate security team tracked it in a matter of minutes. I did not ask Jonathan to block the transfer of the cartel funds to your offshore account. I asked him to reroute it entirely." I gestured to Jonathan Pierce, who was standing quietly by the shattered dining room doors. Jonathan reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. He tapped the glass screen once and held it up for Valerie to see clearly. "My IT team intercepted the transaction the moment it hit the international routing servers." I continued, my voice cold and relentlessly calm. "You severely underestimated the digital infrastructure of a billion-dollar logistics company. We do not just track cargo ships, Jason. We track digital assets with military-grade encryption. The moment your unauthorized device accessed the guest house network to spoof my digital signature, my cybersecurity director flagged it. They let the transaction initiate just far enough to capture your destination ledger. We watched you build your little Swiss nest egg in real time. But cryptocurrency is not as anonymous as you amateurs believe, especially not when my team implements a reverse routing protocol. Jonathan here just transferred that entire $10 million right back to the cartel accounts. But we did not just silently bounce the funds back. We embedded a tracing beacon into the blockchain ledger, along with a comprehensive digital package. We sent them your real names, your actual passport numbers, and the exact details of the Swiss bank account you tried to use to hide their stolen funds. Valerie stopped breathing. The color completely drained from her skin, leaving her face a chalky, sickly white. She stared at the glowing tablet in Jonathan's hands, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as the monumental scale of her failure washed over her. We also included a very specific message, I added, leaning forward across the table, ensuring she felt the full crushing weight of her impending doom. We told them that two career con artists named Valerie and Jason had deliberately attempted to scam their organization, and that you planned to steal their $10 million and vanish to Geneva. We even provided them with the specific tail number of the private charter flight you booked out of Boeing Field for tomorrow morning. You did not, Valerie whispered. Her voice was barely a terrified squeak. Her legs began to tremble so violently that the two tactical police officers had to tighten their firm grips on her arms just to keep her standing upright. Oh, I absolutely did, I smiled, offering her a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. You thought you were stealing my money, Valerie. But you did not steal a single cent from me. You stole $10 million from a ruthless criminal syndicate, and now they know exactly who you are and exactly what you tried to do to them. They are currently looking for you, and men like that do not use the legal system to settle their financial grievances. Jason let out a muffled, agonizing groan from the floor. He understood the terrifying reality of our situation long before Valerie did. He knew exactly what cartel enforcers did to people who tried to steal from them. The police are not here to arrest you to protect my fortune. Valerie, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. They are here to protect you from the people who are currently waiting outside the perimeter gates of this estate. If Detective Callahan had not breached those doors tonight, you and Jason would not have made it to the airport tomorrow. The cartel would have found you long before your flight ever departed. The safest place on earth for both of you right now is a federal holding cell. The realization hit her with the destructive force of a physical blow. The smug, arrogant woman who had planned to torture my daughter and dance on my grave was completely annihilated. Her knees buckled entirely. She collapsed toward the hardwood floor, held up only by the strong arms of the tactical officers. No, please, Valerie screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek of pure terror. Save me. Thomas, save me. Please. I watched the heavy wooden doors swing shut behind them, cutting off her desperate, echoing screams. The silence that fell over the dining room was profound and incredibly heavy. But for the first time in months, the air in my home was completely pure. The venom had been entirely extracted from our lives. I took one final slow sip of the vintage Bordeaux, savoring the rich flavor, and allowed myself to finally exhale a breath I felt I had been holding for an eternity. The battle was finally over, and I had emerged completely victorious. Exactly 1 month has passed since that terrible, chaotic night. The dark, suffocating shadows that had aggressively crept into the corners of my Mercer Island estate have been completely banished. I am sitting on the wide back porch right now, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, enjoying the crisp, cool morning breeze blowing off the lake. The golden sunlight is streaming down through the tall pine trees, casting bright patterns across the manicured green lawn. My heart, the very organ they had so meticulously plotted to quietly destroy, is beating with a strong, steady, and incredibly healthy rhythm inside my chest. A sudden joyful squeal pulls my attention toward the garden. Little Mason is running across the grass as fast as his small legs can possibly carry him. He is chasing a bright red rubber ball, his face lit up with pure, unfiltered happiness. Right behind him, laughing with a bright melodic sound I thought I might never hear again, is my beautiful daughter, Natalie. She is wearing a soft yellow sundress, her bare feet moving lightly over the morning dew. The horrific white medical bandages have been completely removed, leaving behind only faint pink scars as a permanent reminder of our survival. The recovery process for Natalie was incredibly grueling. The high-grade black market animal paralytic took weeks of intense physical therapy and dedicated medical detoxification to fully leave her fragile system. I vividly remember the first time she was finally able to hold a soup spoon by herself again. We were sitting in the sunroom, the morning light pouring over her violently trembling hands. It took her 3 agonizing minutes to lift the spoon to her mouth, but when she did, she looked at me with a fierce, defiant fire in her eyes that reminded me so much of her late mother. I wept that day. I wept not out of sorrow, but out of profound awe for my daughter's unbreakable spirit. She had survived a psychological hell that would have broken the strongest of men. Mason, too, required delicate care. We spent hours in play therapy with the best trauma specialists in Washington, using his plush toy dinosaurs to help him process the bad monsters that had invaded our home. Slowly, the light returned to his brown eyes. He stopped looking at closed doors with fear and started running through them with the careless joy every child deserves. Looking at them now under the bright morning sun, my chest swells with a profound sense of gratitude. She is completely free. We all are. I shift my gaze down to the digital tablet resting on the small wrought iron table beside my coffee cup. I tap the screen to wake it up, opening the local Seattle news application. The top headline is splashed across the screen in bold black letters. 2 international fugitives face consecutive life sentences in federal prison for massive corporate wire fraud and multiple counts of attempted homicide. I read the detailed article with a quiet, solemn satisfaction. The prosecutors did not offer them a single lenient plea deal. Detective Callahan had built an absolutely bulletproof case using our clear evidence, ensuring they could never manipulate their way out of this nightmare. The public trial exposed every dark, twisted detail of their extensive criminal history to the entire world, leaving them with no remaining allies and absolutely no hidden assets to rely on. Valerie and Jason are currently locked away in a highly secure federal detention center. It is a harsh, unforgiving existence behind thick concrete walls. However, as I take another slow sip of my hot coffee, I know with absolute certainty that federal prison is a profoundly merciful fate compared to what would have happened if they had actually managed to escape to Europe. The cartel they attempted to rob would have hunted them down without mercy and delivered a punishment far more brutal than any justice system. I saved them from a bloody demise, and in return, they will never breathe free air again. I set the tablet down and look back out at the bright garden. Natalie catches my eye from across the lawn. She offers me a genuine smile and waves her hand, her eyes shining with renewed trust. I smile back, raising my coffee mug in a silent toast to our hard-won survival. The sprawling logistics empire I built remains completely intact. The massive corporate fortune I amassed over 4 decades of relentless work is securely locked away, completely untouched by the predators who tried to steal it. But as I watch my grandson tackle my daughter into the soft grass, filling the air with infectious laughter, I know the absolute truth. The numbers sitting in my bank accounts mean nothing. I protected my real legacy. I saved my family. They are the only treasure that truly matters, and I will spend the rest of my days ensuring they are completely safe. In the cutthroat world of business, I learned to spot a bad deal from a mile away. But when it came to my own home, loneliness almost blinded me to the dangerous wolves circling my family. True evil does not always break down your front door. Sometimes it knocks politely, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers and a warm, deceitful smile. I realized that a man's true empire is not his bank account or his corporate legacy. It is the blood in his veins and the family he protects. Never ignore your gut, and never underestimate a fiercely determined father. Have you ever felt the terrible instinct that someone in your life was not who they claimed to be? Please share your personal story with us in the comments section below. Do not forget to subscribe and hit the like button for more true stories of survival, betrayal, and justice.